Good morning once again. Thanks so much for staying with us here on the AM Report. South Africans have been urged to prepare for another increase in the cost of living. The National Energy Regulator is today expected to announce whether it's approved Eskom's latest application to increase electricity tariffs by 32%. The country is currently battling stage 5 power cuts, and the power utilities say it needs the money to recover operational costs. So let's unpack this issue further with a former Eskom consultant, in fact, and energy expert at Home Energy, Matthew Cruz, joins us via our video link this morning. Matthew, great to see you. Thanks very much for coming on. As I look at my own load shedding schedule for today, 3 bouts of load shedding. One of them is for 4 hours. How does Eskom possibly justify another hike in tariffs?
Sure, that's a very good question, because we're ultimately paying more for a service that is deteriorating in its levels of delivery to us. So the way that Eskom goes about applying for an increase, like 32%, is they take a look at the costs that they have. All the costs now we're talking about, including primary energy costs, the cost of repayment of debts, the costs to the IPPs that are currently on the grid that they have to give money to for the renewable energy that they get, and they encapsulate all the costs together and say to Nersa, I need to recoup these costs now, I need to make money. And Nersa then sets the price of electricity according to their own policy, not necessarily what Eskom is saying. We can unpack that further.
Yeah. I mean, the issue, I suppose, is that Eskom obviously needs the funds, right? It's the debt that it's dealing with, the rising cost of diesel, and so on and so on. So it needs to get the money from somewhere. But does it need to get the money from taxpayers?
So unfortunately, it'll either get the money through the cost of electricity, or it'll get it through a bailout from the government.
Which ultimately we pay for anyway.
Yeah, well, ultimately the taxpayer pays for anyway. And the government has recently shown that they're not willing anymore to continuously just give bailouts to Eskom with the latest bout of diesel that wasn't paid for. And then finally 5 days was procured after we just hit that stage 6 load shedding. And yeah, what's concerning about this year, though, is that the 32%, that comes at a time where Nersa finds itself between a rock and a hard place. Previously, there'd be like an application of 20%, like last year, and then Nersa approved 9.6%.
Yeah.
But within this time, Nersa's recently lost a bunch of high court applications from Eskom, looking at the way that Nersa structured the 9.6% and confirming that Nersa did it incorrectly. So even if we get a 10% increase this year, which I don't think will happen, we'll get a further 6% add on top of that because of back payment that's due to Eskom.
Sure. I mean, ultimately what analysts are saying is that what Eskom actually needs in terms of a tariff increase, if it's going to cover the holes, is 40 to 45%, insofar as consumers paying more.
So yeah, there is there is that side of the fence of analysts that say that. I myself was in the boardroom when the discussion was taking place of what do we apply for in 2017. I was there in the Eskom executive boardroom, and the conversation went like this. It was like, well, we know that we want 11 or 12% next year because that's what we need, and we know that Nersa typically just takes whatever we apply for and halves it. So then, therefore, let's make the costs look like we need a 21% raise next year. Right. That's literally how the conversation went, and it gave me a lot of confidence as well that, hey, this is what the greybeards are talking about in the executive boardroom. Then I can also be a greybeard one day, be an executive. But I do want to get to this 32% that we're speaking about this year.
So yeah, go ahead.
So the 32%, it's a 32% increase for this year and then 10% increase for next year. And Eskom has said that if they don't get the 32% this year, then whatever amount they don't get will get transferred over to next year. And so Nersa is meant to be ruling on both years today. And what I suspect will happen is, previously we've only had single-digit increases. So last year was 9.6%, and this year, however, I think we're going to get a double-digit increase, but I think we're going to get about a 20% increase overall for this year and next year. And when you think about compounding interest, it's 20%, then you get a 4% overall increase over 2 years. And when you think about the taxpayer, the poorest of the poor that's currently already struggling with all of the increases that have happened, the increase of the tax rates and the inflation rate, CPI, the interest rates, it's just untenable. Yeah. We can't take another increase like this, but it's going to happen anyway.
No, absolutely. I mean, the question becomes, where do consumers get this money from? in a context where many people are not getting annual increases. The cost of living is rising. Food and fuel are unaffordable for most households. Where are people supposed to get the money from?
Yeah, so one thing to talk about in terms of where to get the money from is that we've seen, thankfully, the banking sector coming into this space in a big way. And this is what I'm hoping is that the private sector will start compensating for the failures of the ANC government and Eskom, in that they will start funding solar installations and battery installations for households. And what you see is with this increase that's happening, you can actually get an installation for your solar system and make immediate savings from the middle of next year. Because your repayments to the bank will be less than what you save, or will be less than what you save when you get the installation from what you pay for Eskom. Wow. So if you save 2,000 Rand in your electricity bill, your repayment will be 1,800 Rand. So I know that's only a solution for the few. We hope that there will be a massive shift in the way that Nersa goes about the terminations going forward, so that the further increases coming up will be less for the people of South Africa.
So you're saying that's our only way out of this, Matthew, for us to get off our reliance on Eskom?
So that's a solution for the few, as I said, the people that own houses. You know, it's generally the kind of wealthy and middle class that can do that. The solution for the majority of South Africa, for 80% of South Africa, is, unfortunately, I see the solution is a policy change. A policy change within Nersa, a policy change within the government, policy change, hopefully a regime change at some point. And you know, I'm saying these things that take many years to do, but we're getting to that point now where we're just seeing the system is not working. The way that Eskom goes about applying for increases at Nersa year on year decides the price of electricity. It means that big financiers that want to come in and build big power stations, build renewables, they don't actually know what the price of electricity is going to be in 3 years' time. And how can you finance a big project over 20 years when you don't even know what your returns are going to be after 3 years? You can't. You know, you need to know your returns. So I want to see a set amount of electricity that's set by the government for 10, 15 years that will then bring in a lot of investment, because now people know what their returns will be and they can then capitalize the projects. That's what I'd like to see, a policy change.
Yeah, absolutely. Talking about a regime change, we're 2 days away from the ANC's elective conference, so it may well not take years and years, as you say. But so what happens then, right? If most of the country, let's say a large part of the country gets away from its reliance on Eskom, it gets off the grid essentially, what happens then to that lost income for Eskom?
So that's a really good question, because the one side of the fence that we can talk about, and it's essentially called the utility death spiral. So it's a phenomenon that happens around the world, where the high-paying users, the users that have a lot of electricity, they realize that it's good time now to get a solar and battery installation. Then they go off the grid, and then those high-paying users now are not seen as a revenue to the incumbents. And so then the price of electricity rises. And then the middle class see, oh, now it makes sense for us to also go off the grid with solar and battery. And then the revenue is lost by an incumbent again. And then it's left to the poor, which can't pay. And then the government comes and does a shift in policy. So that's the one side of the fence of the revenue. The other side of the fence, and this is a unique case to South Africa, is that we have this load shedding where we aren't able to meet the demand. And as the houses come off the grid as a load, they actually assist in load shedding and reducing, because now those high energy users are no longer placing the demand on the grid. So in that sense, we're actually assisting load shedding by going off the grid. And then from there, we can then move forward, because the biggest problem that we're facing in South Africa is load shedding, not so much that Eskom isn't getting enough money. Eskom is almost like a black hole. I'm looking forward to the unbundling and the shift away from just one company, one Eskom, where generation has to interact with transmission the same way that IPPs act with transmission, and then we'll see some nice competition going that will actually bring the price of electricity down. So I want that to hasten up and come quicker. Yeah,
you and me both. And there's several people who are DMing me on social media this morning as we have our conversation. So a number of questions coming through. One of them around illegal connections and how Eskom, and I suppose Nersa, takes that into consideration insofar as determining tariff hikes. And then, why does my electricity bill stay the same when I'm without electricity for half the day?
Yes, so let's take a look at the illegal connections. So Eskom has started in May 2020 doing something called load reductions. And they say that they target the areas that have illegal connections in order to protect the equipment that's there, the transformers and the substations, from overloading and exploding. And then they do like an effective form of load shedding in very specific neighborhoods. What I've seen, however, is that those neighborhoods coincide with the neighborhoods that also aren't paying, where it's the municipality that's owing the money to the government, but the municipality itself is then using the money for other things like buying nice German cars and big houses and stuff. So the municipalities typically get 80% of their overall revenue from the money that they put on top of electricity, that they're meant to go and then maintain these substations and maintain the grid and also maintain the illegal connections. But then we know that local government is pretty much failing. So we've got these illegal connections that's getting load reduction. And unfortunately, what's happening is now the poorest of the poor are sitting without electricity for 3 days at a time is what's happening in Soweto. And that's really getting in, like, it really puts the poorest of the poor in a terrible situation where now we've got like almost a second-class citizen system where we've got people sitting in load reduction because of illegal connections, and then you've got the rest of us that are just experiencing normal load shedding. So that's that. So would you like to go on to the subject of the costs? My costs are still the same?
Please, I think that's such a big issue. I mean, how is it possible?
Yes, so what's happening there, and I experience it myself as well, I'm on prepaid, is that people don't really get that there's a charge, a fixed line cost that's included in your electricity. So although I'm paying like my first 500 Rand, the fixed line cost will go off, and at the moment it's like 270 Rand. So that's the first thing. So if you're using a little bit of electricity, like around 1,500 Rand of electricity a month, even if you have only electricity for half the time, you'll still see your amount is going to be about 1,200 Rand.
Sure.
So about the fixed line cost, that's one separate block. And then we've got now a situation where when the power comes back, a lot of your appliances like your fridge, your geyser, they need to ramp up again and get back up to the temperature that they were before. So a geyser, typically you want it to kind of stay at the 90 degrees or 80 degrees that you've set it to. But when the power goes off, it starts cooling down and goes down to 40 degrees. And then you put the power back on and then it needs to heat up all the way again from 40 to 80 degrees. And you'll see it's almost the same amount of energy as if you just kept it consistent. So that's with the fridge and the geyser, and that's some of the biggest users that you have. And then also your cooking and your heating is typically where you're spending most of your money on electricity. And that still takes place every day. So unfortunately, even though the power's gone for half the time, you won't see your bill going down by half. Yeah,
I mean, my co-anchor is next to me here, and he raises an important point. I mean, if what you're saying, about having to get the fridge, for example, back up to the previous level, you're still using the same amount of electricity, which is exactly what you're saying. That's why you're still paying the same amount for electricity. So then what's the point of load shedding?
So the load shedding, what's the point? It's forced upon us. It's the failures of the last 10, 15 years of being able to trying to get power onto the grid. And I've got my own very strong opinions about what happened there with the previous regime and the money that we're seeing, like a lot of the contractors, ABB, and we're seeing a lot of the people getting arrested, Brian Molefe, I don't want to throw out too many names, but like now all the worms are coming out the woodwork. Now that the 9 lost years, as we're saying, is being scrutinized. And that was always the plan of Eskom. The plan was first stop the bleeding of money out of Eskom. So, when Cyril came in, there was a third of executives that were fired, that were known to be connected to Zuma. So to stop the bleeding happened. Then what was meant to happen was we were meant to have a focus on maintenance and getting the system back up to running. And that's where Under the Regulator was saying by 2021, September, we'll have no more load shedding. Yeah. And over the course of those years, what we found is that the inherent corruption that got into the wood when the fish head at the top was corrupt, and everyone knew. I was in Eskom for 11 years. Everyone knew. Brian Molefe and Raj Singh, CFO, came from Transnet directly to Eskom, and then we had 8 CEOs in 10 years that were directly appointed by Zuma. So I'm laughing about it because if I wasn't laughing, I'd cry. Yep. So we were there in Eskom trying our best, and all of this stuff was happening, and we were like, okay, what's going to happen to the future of the country? We're going to be in a very tough situation with our energy sector when the focus is how do we extract money from the state, not how do we give power to the people. So that's like my position, at least, on how we end up here.
Yeah, I mean, we might have to change your strap from energy expert to political analyst this morning, Matthew. But that is the issue of Eskom, isn't it? It is an energy and political issue.
Yes, yeah, and they're so intertwined. And part of my studies, I did an MBA and I did a dissertation on all of this. It was titled Eskom Too Big to Fail or Necessitated to Change. That was the title. And I got a distinction for that, and I'm grateful to say that, but I think it was because it was so spicy, not because of the good writing. And what's seen is in every third world country that goes through a regime change like we had, where we had like a previous complete different system, and then saviors come in, and saviors then take over the nation. So the saviors, unfortunately, what happens is there's a struggle to come into power. And then once they're there are people that got into power through struggle. So we look at the top and we look at, who's there still, the cadre deployment system and the comrades and all those things. People not really competent in technical specialities. And in all third world countries that I looked at, when there's a big regime change, the company that's focused on, or the state-owned entity that's focused on, is the power sector, because it has the most money that's coming from the people, and it has the biggest amount of zeros next to the dollars that flow through it, on top of being confidential. So you can't really extract money too much from, and this is, Praveen Gordon has this kind of commentary, you can't extract money too much from the public budgets of hospitals and schools, because people go and count, how many hospitals did you build, how many schools did you build, but you can extract lots of money from the state-owned entities because everything's confidential,
we've proven that wrong as well, haven't we? We just had Tembisa Hospital in the news for exactly that reason. But Matthew Cruz, it's been a pleasure talking to you this morning. Thanks very much for giving us that broad perspective of the energy situation in our country at the moment. Nersa today expected to announce on its latest, Eskom's latest tariff hike application of 32%. Matthew, thanks very much.